My blood. My father's voice boomed through the room, shaking the walls of my grandfather's century-old house. Every fork froze midair. Plates rattled. My mother stared down at her lap, silent. My uncle stopped chewing. My cousins looked amused. And I just stood there, heart pounding, fingers clenched, blinking through the sting of disbelief. He rose from his seat at the head of the dining table, like a judge passing a cruel sentence. "You were a mistake, Mara," he continued, his eyes burning holes through my chest. "A burden I carried out of pity. You've never been mine. Never." The words slammed into my gut like fists. My knees trembled, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of falling. My aunt gave a quiet chuckle under her breath. "God, Richard," she muttered. Finally, someone said it. I looked around the family table, 12 faces, all related by blood or marriage, and saw no sympathy. Just judgment. Smirks. Disdain. Like they had all known something I hadn't. Like I'd been the outsider all along. "Get out of this house," my father snarled, slamming his palm on the table. "You have no place here." I didn't cry. Not then. My body was frozen in a storm of humiliation. I wanted to scream, to run, to shatter every glass on that table. But before I could move, a sharp thud echoed across the hardwood floor. My grandfather slammed his cane. Hard. Enough. His voice was hoarse, age-worn, but it cut through the room like steel. The air thickened. My father's mouth curled, irritated. "Dad, stay out of." "If that's true," Grandpa interrupted, standing on shaking legs, "then you'd better explain this right now." He pulled a battered, brown envelope from the inside of his coat and tossed it down the table. It slid across the polished wood and landed right in front of my father. "What is this?" my father muttered. "Open it," Grandpa growled. "Or I will." The silence was suffocating. Everyone watched as my father ripped the flap and pulled out a folded paper. Yellowed, old, fragile. His brows furrowed. His face twitched. His hands began to tremble. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. Grandpa leaned on his cane, voice thick with emotion. "The results from 27 years ago. The ones you begged me to bury. The ones I kept, just in case you ever tried to erase her from our bloodline." My father's hands dropped. The document fluttered to the table. His face turned pale. "You remember what it says, don't you, Richard?" Grandpa hissed. "You remember full well that she's your daughter. And you remember why you tried to deny it. Because of your shame. Because of the affair. Because of the lies you told, not her." Gasps. Actual gasps. The kind that shatter illusions. My mother's head snapped up. "Wait, Dad. You stay quiet." Grandpa barked at her. "You were complicit in this. You let him put that girl through hell." I stared at the table, at the trembling paper, too stunned to speak. "She's not a mistake," Grandpa said, softer now, looking right at me. "She's the only decent one in this rotten bloodline." Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't from pain. Not anymore. They were the beginning of something else. Fire. The room was unraveling. My father staggered back into his chair. Pale. Silent. Broken. And I walked out without a word. But I would return. Not as the outcast they mocked. As the one they would regret underestimating. I didn't cry when I left that house. I didn't beg for answers. I didn't shout. I didn't collapse under the weight of betrayal. I walked out of my grandfather's mansion with the same quiet fury that builds before a storm, deadly, patient, and determined. Outside, the cold air slapped my cheeks, but I welcomed it. It kept me awake. It kept me from spiraling into the pain. 27 years. 27 years of calling a man Dad, who saw me as a stain on his reputation. A mistake. And the woman I called Mom? She just sat there, hands in her lap, too cowardly to even look at me. They all knew, every damn one of them at that table. The sideways glances, the cold shoulders growing up, the comments I was too young to understand. All of it made sense now. I wasn't supposed to thrive. I was supposed to disappear. But I didn't. And now, they were going to see exactly what their mistake had become. It started that night. I didn't have a mansion, a name that turned heads, or a trust fund like my cousins. What I had was a studio apartment in a gritty part of the city, 3 part-time jobs, and a stubborn refusal to let life crush me. But I also had something none of them had. The truth. And a fire in my soul that refused to go out. I sat on my mattress-turned bed, my phone buzzing with incoming messages from my so-called family. Aunt June, I'm sure your father didn't mean it. Don't make this a big deal. My cousin Lily, what did you do to him? My mother, let's not talk for a few days until your father cools down. I'm sure we can forget all this. Forget? They wanted me to forget being told I was a mistake? Forget that my existence was an embarrassment? Forget that the only person who stood up for me, an 80-year-old man with trembling hands, was the only one who truly saw me?
No.
This wasn't something I would forget. This was something I would build on. 3 months passed. I quit one of my jobs, picked up another, pushed harder, saved more, barely slept, barely ate. But every hour, every shift, every sacrifice fed the blueprint forming in my mind. I was going to rise. Not for revenge, but because they needed to see the woman they tried to erase. The city was rough, but it taught me more than my elite cousins ever learned in private schools. It taught me hustle. It taught me resilience. It taught me how to find opportunity where no one else bothered to look. It was at a dirty, dimly lit cafe where I met Elias Monroe, a retired venture capitalist with a bad hip and a habit of sipping black coffee at 10 p.m. He was the first stranger who didn't look through me. He asked questions, real ones, about business, strategy, growth. I spoke like my life depended on it because it did. After 4 nights of late conversations, he pushed a thick envelope across the table and said, "Show them what you're made of." Inside, seed funding. Enough to start something small. But I knew I wouldn't stay small. 8 months later, I stood in the mirror, wearing a blazer I couldn't have afforded a year ago. My hair was tied back. My voice steady. Behind me, a team of 6. Young, sharp, hungry, just like me. We weren't a billion-dollar company.
Not yet.
But we were making noise. And people were listening. Especially him. Because 3 days ago, my father's company, yes, his precious empire, filed for bankruptcy protection. Poor investments. Internal mismanagement. Scandals that had been covered up too long. And guess who made the short list of potential buyers?
Me.
The mistake. The girl he disowned. The name he tried to scrub from his legacy. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning. Back in the same room where he had screamed at me, his voice full of hate, his pride so blinding he couldn't see the woman standing in front of him was already greater than anything he'd built. But this time, I wouldn't walk out. This time, I'd sit at the head of the table. And when I spoke, they would listen. The morning of the meeting, I stood in front of that familiar door, the one with the gold embossed nameplate that read, Richard Kensley, founder and CEO. Only this time, I wasn't knocking for approval. I was here to buy everything he ever built. The receptionist, startled by my presence, stood up with wide eyes. "Miss Amara?" "Yes," I said with a calm that even surprised me. "They're expecting me." Her gaze lingered a second too long. She remembered. I could see it in her eyes. The headlines. The exposé about the company's collapse. The rumors swirling about an anonymous female investor with roots to the founder. I walked through those doors like a storm in heels. The boardroom was full. 12 men and women in expensive suits sat in silence. And at the head of the table was my father.
Pale. Gaunt.
The sight of him didn't hurt anymore. It thrilled me. Because now he wasn't roaring. He wasn't calling me a mistake. He was staring at the ground, like a man who saw the edge of his empire cracking. I placed my file down, opened it neatly, and looked up. "Shall we begin?" The silence was deafening. One of the board members, a balding man with trembling fingers, cleared his throat. "Miss Mars, you're the lead of Blackstone Acquisition?" "Yes," I replied. "We're offering full acquisition, debt clearance, full management replacement, and rebranding. My father's voice, scratchy and dry, finally broke through. You're doing this just to humiliate me? I didn't blink.
No.
I'm doing this because you left a legacy full of rot. And I don't inherit rot. I build from ashes. A gasp. Someone actually gasped. He looked like he wanted to scream again. But he didn't. Not in front of the others. Not when the company needed me more than it needed his ego. I'm not going anywhere, he said, leaning forward. You think you'll erase me? You won't.
I smiled, gently.
Almost kindly. I'm not trying to erase you, Richard. You already did that to yourself. The deal closed in 2 weeks. By the time the media caught wind, the narrative was already shifting. The disowned daughter who saved her father's empire. But they didn't know the truth. I wasn't saving anything. I was rewriting it. 2 weeks later, I returned to the mansion. Not as a guest. As a stakeholder. My grandfather had passed the estate to me before he died, less than a week after that dinner table explosion. I barely had time to grieve. But I honored him with my silence. The house felt different now. Like it had shed the poison that once filled its halls. I was hosting a dinner. Every family member was invited. My cousins, my uncle, even my mother, especially my father. And they came. Because now they needed me. The same woman who was once told to get out now sat at the head of the table, a diamond pin on her lapel, and a name the media couldn't stop repeating. Mara, my mother said nervously, we just want to understand how this all happened, how you did it. I sipped my water and glanced around the table. It's simple, I said. You lit the fire. I just refused to burn. My father didn't speak the entire night. His eyes were vacant. He was no longer a lion, just a man who made a mistake he'd never undo. And when I stood to give a toast, I looked directly at him. To the people who called me a mistake. I forgive you, but I won't forget. Because without that pain, I wouldn't be here today. The night after the dinner, I stood alone on the balcony of my grandfather's estate. Now my estate. The air was colder than usual, but I didn't feel it. I looked over the garden where I used to play, barefoot and naive, believing I was just like the others. Believing I was part of a family. Before I knew the stares weren't out of love, but out of guilt and shame. Behind me, the lights from the dining room were still on. I could hear the faint murmurs of my relatives inside. They stayed longer than they should have, afraid to leave, unsure of where they stood now. They were no longer certain who was in charge. The hierarchy had cracked, and in the center of it stood me, the daughter they tried to erase. A knock behind me. I turned. It was my cousin Lily, the one who used to mock my hand-me-downs, the one who once accidentally spilled juice on my essay project the night before I presented at school. Can we talk? She asked. I shrugged. You're talking. She hesitated. I didn't know what he did to you. What he said. You laughed, Lily. I said, not cruelly, just clearly. You laughed when he told me I didn't belong. I thought it was a joke, she mumbled, eyes low. I didn't know he meant it, but you still laughed. She fell silent. Look, she said finally, you've changed. You're powerful now. I was always powerful, I replied. You all just refused to see it. She opened her mouth, but I turned away. I didn't need more apologies. Not yet. Not when they were rooted in fear of my status, not genuine regret. That week, I started making changes. Not out of revenge, but justice. My father's old company? Renamed. Restructured. Every toxic executive removed. Every policy he enforced that oppressed the lower staff. Erased. I implemented scholarships, worker equity, and partnerships with community initiatives. We built forward, not upward. Every time someone said, "You're not doing this to get back at your dad," I simply answered, "I'm doing this so no girl like me ever has to beg to be seen." But there was one thing still unresolved. My mother. She hadn't spoken much since that dinner. She hadn't defended me when I was humiliated. And even now, her eyes never fully met mine. One afternoon, she showed up at the office. Quiet, unsure, holding a small box in her arms. I found these, she said. They were your baby pictures. Your real ones. From the hospital. He made me hide them. She set them on the desk. Her fingers trembled. Why didn't you stop him? I asked, keeping my voice level. Tears filled her eyes. Because I was weak. Because I was afraid if I defied him, he'd throw me out too. I was selfish. I know that now. I looked at her for a long time. This woman who gave me life, but never gave me safety. She looked like she wanted to collapse. But I wouldn't let her. Then fix it, I said. Don't just come with old boxes. Come with actions. Come with truth. She nodded. And for the first time in years, she hugged me. But it wasn't over yet, because a reporter from a major outlet reached out, wanting to do a feature. From Disowned to CEO, the woman who rebuilt what tried to break her. I accepted. And I told the full story. The rejection. The dinner. The words he threw like daggers. The silence of a mother. The cane of a grandfather. And how the lie meant to destroy me became the very thing that made me unbreakable. It went viral. People I didn't know messaged me. You gave me courage. I thought I was alone. My father said the same thing to me once, but I never healed. Until now. And one day, my father showed up. At my office. Uninvited. I walked into the lobby, and there he was. Thinner. Older. Tired.
He didn't speak.
He just handed me a letter. I didn't read it right away. I let him walk away first. Inside, it simply said, I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I needed you to know I was wrong. And I hate myself for it every day. You are more my daughter than I ever was a father. I folded the letter.
Kept it.
But I didn't reply. Some things need time. Some wounds can't be undone. But what I did next would define my legacy. I stood on the stage, spotlight cutting through the darkness, a crowd of 300 staring up at me. It was a leadership summit for young entrepreneurs. The same kind of event my family used to say I'd never belong at. That I'd always be the girl who served drinks, cleaned up after others, and lived in hand-me-downs.
But now?
Now they were listening to me. I was once told. I began, my voice steady, slow, deliberate, that I wasn't real family, that I was a mistake, that I wasn't blood, that I meant nothing. A hush fell over the room, and for a long time I believed it. I continued, until I realized our worth doesn't come from who claims us. It comes from who we decide to become. Applause. Not loud, not explosive, but genuine, from people who got it, who had been crushed by the ones they trusted and needed anyone, to show them it was still possible to rise. When I stepped down from the stage, there were cameras, reporters, young women with notebooks, shaking hands as they asked me questions. But I kept seeing one face in the crowd.
Grandpa.
He wasn't physically there anymore, but in every truth I spoke, in every lie shattered, he was with me.
His cane.
His voice. His courage when everyone else stayed silent. He was the first to say I mattered. And I carried that forward. Months passed. The estate became a refuge for programs that supported girls in foster care. My team and I opened 2 mentorship centers. I visited them every weekend. Not for press, but to look the next forgotten girl in the eye and say, you are not a mistake. I had learned something in the rubble of everything my father tried to destroy. Revenge fades, but redemption, real redemption, has roots. It grows. It heals. It builds. My father? He lived quietly after that letter. He never tried to reclaim anything. He moved to a small cottage outside the city. Alone. One winter morning, I received a message from the local hospital.
He'd collapsed.
I didn't have to go. But I did. Not for him. For me. When I entered the room, he looked smaller than I remembered. Time and regret had chewed away at his pride. Mara, he said, his voice barely a whisper, you're the strongest thing I ever gave up. I said nothing for a moment. Then,
no.
You never gave me anything. I found my strength because you left me no choice. A single tear slid down his cheek. I'm sorry. I nodded once. I know. And then I left. Not out of cruelty, but because I no longer needed to stay. I had nothing left to prove. Now, every time I pass that mirror in the estate hallway, the same one I used to avoid, I look. And I smile. Because the girl who was once told she wasn't real, she became the most real thing they ever had. Not out of hate, but out of survival, out of courage, and out of a quiet